Beautiful morning footage of New York City. Sun rising, twin towers gleaming, people walking the streets. A morning that started just like any other. September 11th, 2001. The sky over New York City was completely clear, blue, spotless,
Look, the coffee cart.
beautiful.
Can we get muffins? Yeah,
Kids were heading to school. People were sipping their morning coffee. Thousands of workers had already settled into their desks inside the towering buildings of the World Trade Center. Nobody thought,
Good morning, everyone.
nobody even imagined
Hey, good to see you.
that this morning was
settling
about
in.
to become the
Morning,
darkest
Tom. How was the
morning
commute?
in modern history. Today we're going to tell the story of that day. Not just the story of an attack. This is the story of thousands of people who walked out of their homes that morning and never came back. This is the story of the mothers, the children, the husbands and wives for whom that was their last morning. And this is the story of hatred and its devastating consequences. Stay with me, because this video will shake you to your core. This story doesn't begin on September 11th, 2001. Its roots go back much further. Decades of politics, decades of grievance, and a dangerous ideology that had been quietly growing for years. In 1996, a man made a declaration from the mountains of Afghanistan. His name was Osama bin Laden. He came from a wealthy Saudi Arabian family. He was educated, but his mindset, his hatred, had sent him down a very dangerous path. He issued what he called a fatwa, a religious decree for the entire world to hear. He said, "America is ruling over Muslim nations. Its soldiers are standing on our sacred land. This will not be tolerated." And then he said something that sent shockwaves across the world. "American soldiers or civilians, they are all our enemies." These weren't just words. This was the birth of a deadly ideology. Bin Laden strengthened his network in Afghanistan, al-Qaeda. He recruited young men from across the globe. He filled them with hate. He trained them to use weapons, and he gave them a mission. That mission was inspired by a plot called Operation Bojinka, turning airplanes into weapons. Between 1999 and 2001, 19 terrorists entered the United States. They lived like ordinary people. They rented apartments. They enrolled in flight schools. And they learned to fly.
Okay.
Think about that for a moment.
Watch your airspeed. Don't let
They
it
weren't
drop.
learning to fly
sir.
so they could become pilots. They were
Set your
learning to
flap
fly
10 degrees,
so they
keep the
could
ball
turn
centered,
those
10
planes
degrees,
into weapons.
centered. Hold it steady.
America's
Focus.
intelligence
Signal
agencies,
from
the
Tehran
CIA
confirmed,
and the
sir.
FBI, had received
Worse than
some
we
warning
thought.
signs.
Check the attachment.
There were red flags, but the dots were never connected, and the plot was never stopped. The night of September 10th, 2001, 19 men were in their hotel rooms. They had their tickets booked for the next morning. They knew that after the next morning, they would not be alive. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, at Logan Airport in Boston, at Dulles Airport in Washington, and at Newark Airport. People were boarding their flights. Most of them were business travelers. Some were families heading on vacation. Some were students. Some were children. And among them were 19 terrorists. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 takes off from Boston to Los Angeles. 92 people on board. At 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 also departs Boston for Los Angeles. 65 people on board. At 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 departs from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. 64 people on board. At 8:42 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 takes off from Newark to San Francisco. 44 people on board. 4 planes.
Snacks and beverages, anyone?
265
Just water,
passengers
please.
and crew
Of
members.
course. Here you go.
and 19 terrorists who had no intention of letting any of them reach their destination.
Coffee or tea, sir?
At 8:14
Mom,
a.m.
look at the
inside
clouds.
Flight 11,
They're beautiful,
the air
sweetie.
changed. Several men stood up. They had box cutters and knives. They attacked the flight attendants and began moving toward the cockpit. The pilot tried to send a distress signal to air traffic control, but by then, it was already too late. The cockpit door was forced open, and now Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of this plot, was flying that plane. Passengers had been pushed to the back. Some were told, "There's a bomb, stay calm." They had no idea that this flight had no destination. Within minutes, the same thing happened aboard the other 3 planes. None of the 4 planes were in safe hands anymore. They had become 4 flying missiles. At 8:46 a.m. and 40 seconds, in the sky above Manhattan, a plane appeared. It was flying very low. It was moving very fast. And then, boom. American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. From the 93rd floor to the 99th floor, flames erupted. All of New York heard that explosion. People stopped in their tracks on the sidewalks. Workers rushed to windows in their offices. Some thought maybe it was a small plane. Some thought maybe it was an accident. Nobody knew. This was only the beginning. Inside the North Tower, the upper floors were burning. People were trapped. Stairwells were cut off. Smoke had filled the air. And then, people picked up their phones. Someone called home. "Mom, I'm in the tower. There's a fire. I don't know if I'm going to make it out." Someone texted their wife, "I love you and the kids. Always will." For some people, there was only one way out. The window. Those windows were opened, and some people jumped. It wasn't a choice. It was a desperate act forced on them. It was the most heartbreaking face of that attack. At 9:03 a.m., the entire world was now glued to their televisions. News channels were broadcasting live. Cameras were focused on the North Tower. And then, another plane entered the frame. Fast, very fast. And it hit the South Tower, live, in front of the entire world. In that moment, news anchors were speechless. Studios fell silent. Hands flew to mouths across the country. Now, there was no doubt left. This was not an accident. This was an attack. A calculated, deliberate, and terrifying act of terror. At 9:37 a.m., Washington, D.C., the most secure area in America, home to the Pentagon, headquarters of the United States military, and American Airlines Flight 77 slammed directly into it. This was no longer just an attack on New York. This was Washington. This was the heart of America. This was the headquarters of the world's most powerful military. And it was burning too. Panic swept through the White House. Vice President Dick Cheney was rushed to an underground bunker, and President George W. Bush, who at that moment was sitting with children at a school in Florida, was handed a note. Written on that note,
I see. This is grave indeed.
America is under attack. But there was a turning point in this story. A moment that breaks your heart and fills you with pride at the same time. United Airlines Flight 93. This plane was traveling from Newark to San Francisco. There were 4 terrorists on board as well. But something different happened on this flight.
It can't be.
Through phone calls, the passengers had learned that the other planes had been crashed deliberately, that this was no ordinary hijack.
This isn't a heart attack.
that their plane was about to be used as a weapon too.
Yes.
Those passengers talked to each other, and they made a decision. We will not die quietly. Todd Beamer called his wife. He said, "I love you." And then, over the phone,
Goodbye.
a voice was heard. "Let's roll." The passengers stormed the cockpit. There were screams, there was a struggle, lives were on the line. But in the end, the plane crashed into an empty field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At 10:03 a.m., all 44 people on board were killed. But it is believed that the plane's real target was the U.S. Capitol building, the seat of America's Congress. If those passengers had not risen up, if they had not fought back, today's story would have been even more devastating. They gave their lives to prevent another catastrophe. This was sacrifice. Real sacrifice.
Keep moving.
Back in New
Let's
York,
go. Move.
fires continued to
Stairs are
rage in
clear.
both towers.
Coming through.
Firefighters were climbing up as civilians streamed
Keep
down.
moving.
They
We'll
knew
get you out.
they might not come back.
Go, go.
They
Stay
went
calm,
anyway.
everyone. Watch your step,
At
man.
9:59 a.m., the South Tower, 110 floors, collapsed after burning for 56 minutes. That fall, that cloud of smoke, that sound, the entire world watched. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower also came down, after standing for 102 minutes. Within just a few hours, the buildings that had touched the sky since the 1970s, the towers that symbolized the power and prosperity of the world, were a pile of rubble. And beneath that rubble, thousands of people. When the smoke finally settled, when the world counted the cost, the numbers were devastating. 2,977 people were killed. Among them, 246 passengers and crew on all 4 flights. 2,606 at and around the World Trade Center. 125 at the Pentagon. And 19 tons. Terrorists also died. Among those 2,977 people were citizens from more than 90 countries, firefighters and police officers, bankers and janitors, mothers, fathers, children. More than 6,000 people were injured. Thousands of families were broken forever. And thousands of people who lived near Ground Zero are still sick today from what they breathed in that day. And the world itself changed. Airport security changed. National policies changed. War broke out in Afghanistan. War broke out in Iraq. One attack reshaped the map of the entire world. Today, where those 2 towers once stood in New York, there is a memorial, 2 deep reflecting pools, and along their edges, etched in bronze, are 2,977 names, the names of those who were lost that day. Every year on September 11th, flowers are placed beside those names. 2 beams of light are shot into the sky, and the entire world pauses for a moment. September 11th, 2001, is not just a date. It is a wound. It is a memory. It is a lesson. This lesson is that hatred only gives birth to destruction, that violence cannot be answered with more violence, that when human beings start treating each other as enemies, the world burns. To those 2,977 souls, our deepest tribute. To those firefighters who knew they might not come back and still climbed those stairs. To the passengers of Flight 93 who refused to surrender even in the face of death. And to every family still living with that pain today. Never forget. If this video moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to know this history. Drop a comment below. How did this video make you feel? And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this one will keep coming.